Sorry. No. So I would just like to say hi to everybody. Welcome to December's Lunch and Learn session today. We are joined by Marita Porter, Emer Gallagher, Nicola Fortune, Aisling Flynn and Kevin de Groot. So a massive thank you and welcome to you for your time, for doing this presentation today and for all the work you put into preparing the slides and your toolkit. So the Emer and Marita lead our communities of practice on all things data, and they have put together this career registration guide, which they are going to showcase to you today. So I'm going to hand over to you. So big thank you, and I'm going to turn my camera off now.
Thank you, Caroline, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Emer Gallagher from Queen's University Belfast. And yes, the Career Registration Toolkit is one of the products that has come out from the community, the All Things Data community of practice that we've been holding over the last couple of years, with representatives from most AHECS institutions, actually. So we looked at different types of data, but the real thing really in around the discussions and the group that was capturing people's imagination, people were asking most about, was a relatively new survey called a career registration survey, which is where a student gives us some insight into their feelings around their career readiness. So today we're going to, if we move on to the next slide, then the things that we are going to cover today is we're going to give you some perspectives. Now today's session won't be all about the analysis of the data. We talk some a bit about that, and the toolkit will help you as well if you're wanting to do that. But also we're wanting to give everybody an overview of really what career registration is, what its value is, what its initial value that we thought it would have, and some other connections and things that we're finding and useful ways in which practitioners are using it as well. And also some insights as well. Thank you to Aisling from Maynooth, who's joining us today, to give us some insight into somebody coming new into career registration who's trying to launch with it. What are the reasons they're going for it? What are the challenges? What are the values that they're seeing in it as well? So we will be today looking at a few things. We have said Marita Porter from UCD will be covering that overview of what, why, how, where and when of career registration. Kevin de Groot from UCD has also been working closely with Marita, and actually Queen's and UCD have had quite a connection over the last number of years because we both started into this at a similar time about 2-3 years ago. And Kevin's been doing lots of great work in terms of the data visualizations and has some insights and useful tips in around those sorts of things to let you see how this data can be presented for ease of access to practitioners who really aren't data isn't necessarily their thing, but it makes it easy and for them to access and interpret the data. We're also delighted that we have Nicola Fortune from UCD, who's going to give us her particular insights into the use of career registration in practice. Nicola is a career consultant, so she's been using the data to help her in individual and in group context, so she's going to give us some insight into that. Aisling, as I mentioned, Dr. Aisling Flynn from Maynooth, is also a member of the community practice. She was very actively involved in that, and also is looking as someone who's coming using the toolkit to try to launch career registration at Maynooth. And then at the end, myself and Marita will come back, talk about sort of a few things, what's next, what we're thinking of doing next, and also take some questions from the audience and have a bit of chat and your thoughts and input in as well. So just before I hand over to Marita, I have put up a little question in the chat. I'm grateful if you just put your thumbs up if your answer is yes. And just leave it blank if it's not, but we're just wondering at this stage, just a thumbs up or down or a yes, no. Have you heard, how many of you have heard of career registration before today? Put it in the chat there now. What's a thumbs up? Okay, it's with quite a number here, 5, 6, so perhaps just under half the audience, so most people are coming new to this today. Okay, so Marita, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's great to get a feel for the room as to where everybody's at and their understanding of career registration. So let's make sure that we all have a shared understanding of what it is. So when we look at what is career registration? I mean, it's essentially a tool for monitoring, as Emer said, students' career readiness, beginning with the student in first year and measuring right up until they graduate. So it's a methodology that provides sort of like an evidence-based approach to really strengthening that strategy of the transition of the student from university to work. So career registration was actually developed in 2012 in the University of Leeds in the UK, and it's actually been widely adopted across most of the UK universities. So it's starting to filter over here into the Irish universities. I've heard there's a few in Europe have adopted, I've heard Portugal mentioned, and I think it's really taking off in Australia as well. So you might say to yourself, why would I bother with career registration? Well, we believe there's several critical reasons why you should be looking at career registration. One of them is that it's comprehensive. So you're gathering data from every student in every year that's with you in university. So this ensures you've insight into every student's kind of career employability needs and not just those that are already motivated to engage with the service. It's current. You're collecting it in the first few months of every year. So it's real-time data. So you can actually identify the students' needs while they're still with you, as opposed to waiting for graduate outcome destination data where you find out there's an issue after they've left. This data is connected, so you can actually look at it against the data attributes of a student record. So you can start to correlate and see if there's any connections between their career readiness and maybe their year, their gender, or anything like that that's in the student record. Crucial. Like any other university that's implemented career registration, we feel it's filled a significant data gap. You know, having that deeper understanding and insight into the student's career readiness allows us now and equips us with a much stronger position to be able to create the interventions at the times that they need it the most. So just when you get a copy of these slides, we've just added in a link there. This is a learning gain project done in the UK. It was over the course of 3 years and involved 15 institutions. Some of them starting to look at career registration, some of them already had implemented, and they were looking to see what are the uses that career registration could bring. Now I've put them up here. I'm not going to read them out one by one, but you'll start seeing things like can identify risk groups, you know, evaluate effectiveness, assessment of impact, you know, all the really good things that data can bring to career development initiatives. So how are we collecting this data? So it's actually been collected in a simple survey format. So in UCD, we ask 3 questions. In Queen's, they ask 2 questions. Our first 2 are the same. One is on career readiness. The second one is on work experience. And the third one then is looking at sectors of interest of where they want to work upon graduation. So who are we collecting it from? So both Queen's and UCD have been collecting it for 4 years. Queen's have been collecting it from their full student population for those 4 years. And in UCD, we collected for the first 2 years for undergraduates while we piloted the project, but now have expanded that population to include all students. So where are we collecting the data? We've actually embedded it in the registration process. So a space where students are having to engage with every year. And when we're collecting it is at the start of the academic year. So that data collection piece is happening usually over the months of August, September and October. So I thought let's have a look at the 3 questions before I pass over to Kevin, who's going to show you some of the ways of working with the data. And what I'm going to show you is the examples that are UCD questions, but within the guide you'll actually see we've the copies of Queen's questions that they ask, which you'll see are very similar, and also UL ask these questions too. And in the appendix of the guide we've actually put any UK university questions that might slightly differ if you wanted to kind of see the questions they're asking as well. So the first one is career readiness, and we give them option of 9 statements to choose from, and we're looking to see which one most closely reflects their current career thinking. So you can see that starts from I'm not ready to go there, right up to, you know, I have a job or further study confirmed. You'll see on the right-hand side that kind of categorization of no plan, some plan, clear plan, sorted. So that's categorization for analytical purposes. They actually align with the resources that Careers Network offered the students, and those categories are not visible to the students as part of the survey. Question 2. So we asked them what kind of work experience or employability activities are getting in the last 12 months. Now we've made this question time bound because we want to be able to measure the learning gain and the experience gain from year to year. So we give them 9 options to choose from, and again they select all that apply. So the first 3 you'll see there generally would involve the university, so you'd have visibility to those, but the latter half of those options often organised and done by the students themselves, so it's giving us full visibility to the students' types of work experiences that they're getting, which is great. The last question, UCD are the only ones asking this one at the moment, but it's looking at where would you like to work upon graduation. So we actually give them a list of 33 sectors. You might think, oh my God, that's huge. But UCD is very large and diverse, and we want to make sure these sectors resonate and connect, and students can identify with these. So we've used these, we've iterated them slightly over the years of the survey, and we've also made sure that they align with the HEA sectors of industry and anything used in EU for future connection of data sets. So they're the 2 questions. So I'm going to hand you over now to Kevin. Kevin is the data and surveys analyst in UCD. He joined us just over a year ago and has had a fundamental role in really enhancing our ability to analyse and report on this data. So I'll hand over to Kevin now. Thank you.
Just going to see if I can take control of this presentation. Thanks, Marisa. Now, where is that button gone? Is it visible?
Just right up top, Kevin, on the right-hand side beside the leave button, there's a share button.
Oh, I see. I thought we were sharing the same presentation, but that's no problem. Just load up the one I have here. Now, there we go. And let's do that. Now, share. Okay, can everyone see that? Yes, okay, perfect. Okay, so I am going to spend a few minutes just giving you an overview of some of the kind of technical considerations that you should bear in mind if and or when you're ready to launch career registration. So I think I've kind of gone on about this and trying to drum this into people as they move into analytics full stop, but probably the single most important step is understanding that your data analysis is going to be cyclical and iterative, and that it's important to consider the amount of time you're going to need to put aside for it, and that it's not something that's a one-off. Obviously, the registration survey runs every year, but your process and your analysis and your evaluation can kind of match that as well. So you need to constantly review, and it all begins with asking a question, which through further analysis is then refined, which means you can ask a better question, etc., etc. And that naturally evolves over time as you collect more data, and as you've refined your questions, you'll be able to answer more complex questions, more nuanced questions. But for the time I have today, what I'm going to focus on are points 2 through 4, which is considerations in relation to the processing of data, the analysis, and how one shares that. So in relation to the process, just some general considerations. So when you're collecting your data, just be considerate of the type of data that you actually want and make sure that it's the right data, because you can collect an enormous amount of data. You just want to make sure that it's the correct type of data that you need to answer the kind of questions that you want. In doing that, you need to be aware of potential biases that will come into your analysis and your data collection. So that can be sampling the specific cohort in the population rather than the whole population, and various other forms of bias. You then need to determine the time frame. So if you're running a pilot, that might be a couple of years. Once you launch it in its entirety, you may choose to run it for, I don't know, the foreseeable 10, 20 years. So where are you going to store that data? Where are you going to collect it? How are you going to collect it? And what kind of information do you need? So is it going to be new? Is it something that you can access? So for example, in UCD, and I think Queen's is much the same, we kind of mix some of the data that is survey data with some of the data which is career registration data on the basis of students registering, so that we have an enormous amount of data on them already, so we're using the existing data and then we're mapping new data onto that. But that suffices our particular cause. It may not yours, in which case you'd need to consider how to collect that data, what data. So again, it's this iterative process. So just think of how you're going to collect the data and why you're collecting it more than anything. Then I suppose phase 2 would be the analysis, and ideally you get a data set which looks like this, which is really nice and neat. Everything is in its individual columns, every row is unique, and it's really easy to analyze and visualize.
Kevin, have you got a slide to show in there? It's just it's not coming through at the moment, just to show that particular scheme.
Let me share that again. There we go. Can you see that?
It's showing that first slide. See when you go into share and there's an option there, window. If you look in there, you might see the slide that you're looking for.
Oh, apologies. Hang on a sec. There we go. Is that doing
it? That's it.
Yeah. There we go. So that was, well, I'll take you back through some of the data considerations in that case, because you probably missed that. But the gist of it was really selecting the right type of data and then determining the time frame and whether or not you need to collect and add new data to what you currently have, or whether or not you have sufficient data in your existing data. And that would be chatting to IT services principally, to find out whether or not they've collected that kind of information already. In terms of the ideal data set, so this is what I was talking about. So ideally, all of your data is in neat little columns. It's complete. Every row is a unique row. It's very easy to read. It's very easy to analyze. But the reality, even with the considerations that IT put into collecting data, is that it usually looks a bit more like this. And this isn't a bad reality at all. So this I wouldn't even consider typically messy data, but you can see that here we have multiple numerical values for what would be a categorical answer, the type of work experience that you have. They've been numbered numerically. Now we need to separate those. Some of them have extra blank spaces in that need to be cleared up. We have titles that make absolutely no sense whatsoever. We have majors that are separated by major and joint major. We have lots of blank rows as well. So these are just considerations in relation to how you'd approach that, what the best approaches are and how to process that. And I think we've included that in the publication that we're circulating and discussing today. But some of the common steps that you'd ordinarily undertake would be removing duplicates and various other kind of, removing the kind of irrelevant data. I'm thinking of an example now that Marita would be familiar with. I'm going through a data set at the moment and I've just dropped 500 columns because they're completely irrelevant. So, these are some of the considerations. Some of the functions in Excel and Google Sheets in particular are extremely helpful with this. So these are just some of the basics, but just familiarize yourself with some of the basics and it'll go a long way to solving your problems. And then if you can, pivot tables are an excellent way to explore your data and even to present your data. They're actually a lot easier to use than people seem to think. And then obviously, as I said before, befriending your IT colleagues is a major boon because they will be able to help you with a lot of technical issues. Now, in terms of visualizing your data, we use, by we I mean UCD and Queen's, use dashboards, and there are two principal options there. So you've got Power BI or Tableau. Power BI is used in Queen's. We use Tableau. Now, dashboards. So this is the UCD dashboard in Tableau. The power of dashboards is that they're dynamic. They allow and in fact empower users to make their own inquiries into your data analysis. So, they're not static. That's not to denigrate static reports at all. It's just a different way of presenting the information. Now, if we look at this, for example, here, we can see the types of work experience gained. Now, you can dynamically inquire into this by adding various different filters. But the point is that you can also replicate this analysis in Excel and it can produce the exact same results. So here we have a pivot table at the top. and then we just have an according chart at the bottom and replicate it in a kind of more exotic way at the bottom right here with slightly different colors. But the point is that it's an easy way of conveying the information in a clear way to your audience. So if you want to put forward, if you have an agenda, an objective that you want to achieve, this is how you achieve it, and this is how you achieve it quite easily. So if you don't have access to any of the visualization tools, don't worry about it. So ultimately, I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that there's lots of different approaches and tools. One size does not fit all. So even though someone has all the bells and whistles, it doesn't make your analysis any less. The ultimate goal of the analysis is just to be able to communicate your analysis to your target audience, whoever that is. So on that note, I'll just give you a very brief overview of our dashboard. Let me just share that with you now, if I can find it. So I'll stop sharing here and share this instead. So here we go. Let me just increase that. So this is the career registration dashboard, or rather it's a demo with artificially created dummy data. But you can see here we have 3 tabs at the top covering 3 questions that Marisha covered. You can see they're interactive. So if I hover over something, you can see how everything else also adjusts. Our respondent count, all the rest of that. I've got plenty of filters I can add. I can segment my data by stage, by gender, by fee status. As I move on to work experience, it is much the same. So that's the dashboard we just had a quick glimpse of. And you can see that the dynamic and kind of interactive nature of the dashboard is very appealing. And then finally, sectors of interest, where I've listed our sectors of interest, and now we're looking at how they map over onto academic stage and whether or not an academic stage has an effect. And then again, you can filter by college, school, program, and all the rest of that. And then you can include information buttons for additional information and the likes. So this is really just a very quick whiz-top tour of the use of dashboards, but really the point is that there's many different ways of visualizing your data. So don't be put off if you can't or don't have access to Tableau or Power BI. I think I will leave it at that. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. So as everyone may have noticed, we're a Zoom campus. We're not quite as familiar with Teams. So give me a second here. And let me see if this is working. So can people see my slides? Yes. Great, thanks, Kevin. So my name is Nicola Fortune. So I'm a career and skills consultant here in UCD, and I'm just going to talk to you briefly about how I actually use the data that that Kevin, I suppose, delivers to us so beautifully packaged up with his Tableau. So when I'm using the data, I suppose, obviously I'll use it just to inform my practice generally, but kind of more specifically, I think in terms of planning, it can be a really powerful tool. So like most of you, kind of, I suppose at the end of the year or the start of the year, I'll sit down and I'll look at maybe my graduate outcomes survey data, my career registration data, if you have it available, as well as uptake on services and things like that, and try to make a plan for where I might need to have maybe additional interventions, or I might want to change how I'm working with a certain group. So looking specifically, I suppose, about how I'm using the career registration data as part of this. This is just a couple of examples, I suppose. So as Marisha and Kevin mentioned, the very first question that people are asked is basically career readiness. Where would you actually rate yourself on these 10 statements? So if I'm looking at a particular cohort and I'll look at this and go, well, is there anything interesting coming up here? So for instance, if I saw a lot of students were saying something along the lines of, I know what I want to do, but not sure how to get there, or I have no idea what to do. So if I thought there was more students saying that proportionally than I would expect, that might suggest that an intervention like a career planning workshop would be useful. So similarly, I suppose, when I'm working directly with the students in workshops and things like this, obviously the data itself can be quite useful. So if we are working with particular groups of students, obviously they're all kind of, they're individuals, but also as cohorts, it can be useful to know more about them so that we can tailor our material. So for instance, looking at this question here, where we're looking at what kind of work experience students have had in the previous 12 months. So I just kind of put 2 little snapshots here of 2 different student groups. So you can see the answers are quite different. So for the top group there, we have, I think it's about 30% of them have worked full time prior to the course. Whereas you can see for the group below, it's about about 8 or 9%. So obviously that's going to have an impact maybe on the nature of how I'm working with the students or how I'm tailoring my messaging to those particular students. Also, when I'm talking about using the data with students, obviously sharing the data back with students is a very powerful thing to do. So for instance, if I'm having an event or I'm having a workshop or something like that, or if I'm in a class with students, I might remind them about having done this survey, talk about how we asked these questions, and actually give them the data back as context. So for instance, when the students were asked in this class kind of which statement they agreed with, the most common was, I have a career in mind, I want to gain some work experience. So that's why we're here today. So we're going to do an internship workshop. So again, just kind of sharing it back directly with the students in that way. So this is how I suppose share it back with the students and use it. Obviously, it could be used in different ways. I know, for instance, Marisha also uses it to actually directly message students depending on what statement they actually ticked at the start of the year. So depending on the statement they picked, they're put in one of those groups that in the background, so the no plan, big plan, clear plan, and then there's messaging sent out to the student to actually align with the resources that might be a best fit for those students. So things like that are also going on in the background. I suppose the last one there, I suppose, that I wanted to focus on is how I'm actually using this data with our stakeholders. And to me, this is actually really the key piece and the real value here. So we can use it in different ways. So one of the ways is actually just looking at things like the sectors of interest. So for instance, which of these sectors would an engineering student pick? So obviously you're going to see lots of them picking engineering, but also things like, obviously, and as expected, a lot of them will pick things like business consulting and things like that. So we might already know that anecdotally, and we know that from kind of previous years, but actually having the data to share back, say with employers, for instance, to say, well, actually a lot of our students are interested in this area, or even to notice, I know, for instance, if a student or if a group of students hasn't selected something that I might expect, that's something that could be useful as well. So I know one of my colleagues, for instance, noticed that none of her students had selected a particular sector that actually was very interested in that student group. So I suppose highlighting what your students know as well as kind of what they're interested in can be quite useful. When we're talking about stakeholders, the career registration data, really though, a lot of the time I actually am talking about kind of working with faculty in the university to get access, or to, I suppose, to maybe convince somebody that I have a case for something. So, and that's kind of the most important thing I've actually found, or the biggest value add that I've found with career registration data. So actually using it as evidence that there is a need for some sort of intervention. So for instance, if I was meeting with an academic, I might say, well, these are your particular students. So we've looked at your particular class or your particular year or your group. As you can see here, we have quite a lot of students in the no plan category. So we drill down into that a little bit further, obviously, with the academic. We'll also have the opportunity to share the data directly with the student, with the academic, with the faculty. So that lovely dashboard that Kevin has is actually available on our intranet, so we can actually share that directly with the academics so they can play around with it a bit more. And really what we're looking for is we're looking to get support, I suppose, in saying, well, it's not just I think that your students would benefit from something. It's really saying the data here and the students themselves are telling us they would benefit from this. And that's a huge difference really when we're actually working with academics to be able to say that. So that's kind of where I want to leave it for myself, because actually that's, I suppose, the most powerful use of the data for myself. So again, I'm happy to answer any questions as we move along, but for the moment I might pass you on to my colleague Aisling, who's going to talk about where she is in the process.
Thanks, Nicola. Just going to share my slides. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Aisling Flynn from Maynooth University, and just delighted to kind of share our journey with career registration to date. Many thanks again from Rita and Emer for inviting me along to kind of share that today. So just to begin with a little bit of context in terms of Maynooth. So we've underwent, I suppose, significant growth over the last 5 to 6 years since I came to Maynooth. So it's been really exponential, and we have a highly diverse student population, so over 50% first generation students. So for many of them, kind of education is a transformational experience. So for us, it's really important that data piece to capture that and to be able to evidence it. About a year ago, we had our first new female president, Professor Eva Lenonen. And there's a new strategy forthcoming as well. So I've seen it as potentially an opportunity to look at career registration, and it's something we've been wanting to do for a while. As I joined this community of practice, I was keen to follow my former colleagues in Queen's and UCD, and so that Maynooth could also look at career registration and really seriously think about that moving forward. The benefits of career registration, for me, it was very much that piece about strategic planning, department engagement, being able to show them the evidence, speak their language in terms of the data, and then also look at those interventions that Nicola mentioned, which are hugely important for students. I was keen as well to measure the effectiveness of existing initiatives that we had running, and also to raise awareness amongst the student body of those, because by the very nature of asking the question, I was hoping that students would think about, oh, I haven't, but how do I engage in this? I suppose, as I've said here, the hardest thing is getting started, and definitely the employability toolkit for us was an invaluable resource that was created by the community of practice, and for the most part colleagues in obviously UCD Queen's, and I know UL fed into it as well, which is fantastic. So this is a succinct document. It contains everything you need to know, which is exactly what I wanted, and very much formed the basis of our business case moving forward. You can really benefit from the wealth of experience from those colleagues in those institutions where they've saved, or where they've rather shared their practices, experiences, learnings of career registration. So we can all benefit. I'm a big believer in not reinventing the wheel, and time is very precious for us all. So it is a fantastic resource, and I encourage you, if you haven't already, to look at that. These are tried and tested methods, and it's a research proven methodology, and that was something that very much formed part of our business case, that we reinforce that, and the volume of institutions, not just in Ireland but across the UK, that are implementing career registration right now, so to even bring that data forward. It is an incredibly useful tool, the data in itself, and I think senior management did acknowledge and recognise that, which was positive. In terms of some of the lessons, we're still on the journey. A big one is allow plenty of lead time for this. I'd say a year plus. I probably started this maybe late November with my colleagues in careers and placement on trying to get this through. And we haven't got it quite there yet, but we're definitely nearly there is what I'd say. So it does take a lot of lead time. I think Kevin's already mentioned it, make friends in IT, and I would add to that in registration as well. It's incredibly important. Often their processes, their key deadlines, etc., will differ to ours, and sometimes they're much earlier. There's a lot of testing involved, and they need things in much sooner. So that was a learning curve for me. Find a sponsor is what I'd say, or a couple of advocates on the senior management team or the university executive, whatever you call it in your institution, and meet with them separately and make sure they're on board and talk them through the value of this. We've definitely found that useful. We have a vice president for EDI, and she was particularly interested in the data it could bring into her context in terms of Athena Swan, etc. And it's understanding, I suppose, their briefs and what value this data could bring to the institution as a whole as well. So I find that particularly useful. Anticipate the hurdles. So obviously GDPR can be one, where the data is hosted, the resourcing of all of this. So kind of think about that in advance where possible. I suppose a challenge for me is, I was thinking we don't have any resource to look at this data, etc. And it's kind of weighing up a couple of options. You might need this data and get it in to get the resource. And that's what I thought. It was worth my time and effort and energy to try and get this through. And then we can look at the resource to follow it, because we would have the data to influence the strategic decisions of departments moving forward, hopefully. Allow plenty of time, as I mentioned, in terms of the testing, etc. And if you're wanting to bring in changes, know that you're going to have to allow that time as and when you bring them in. And I suppose finally, just be very, very clear on the why for the institution. I think that is key, to kind of step outside and have that wider knowledge of that. And I also, I suppose, would influence people in saying that look at the wider institutional data and think about how career registration could complement that and really add to it, and get those stakeholders on board as well. So kind of leave you with the final quote of, it always seems impossible until it's done. So I look forward to coming back and saying it's done and we're hoping for next September. So I'm going to refer you back to Marita and Emer now. And I think we'll probably take questions at the end.
Yes, thank you indeed, Aisling, Nicola and Kevin. Yes, that was really useful. So Marita and I are essentially open to questions at the moment, but also we were going to talk briefly about what's next. And I think while we're talking about what's next as well, I've just put in another little question in the chat. And again, if you want to give us the thumbs up, if this is something, if you had sufficient resource, would you consider running career registration at some point in the future? So if you want to just comment against that in the chat as well. But the what's next. So Marita, it's a wee bit addictive, isn't it? Once you get so far with the careers registrations, and you sort of say, "Now I've done this, I could also do that." So where are UCD?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I mean, because it's an enormous data set, so it does take your time to get, really behind it and all the work that we've got to. I mean, we're 4 years in now, and I feel we're only kind of starting to do these extra things now on top. And I think Nicola spoke there about how, she's communicating now the students where they're at. So they're, as a class, as a program, they're knowing kind of amongst their peers where they are. And she mentioned actually, and it's something we're doing, is emailing every student that completes that survey an email specific to the answer they give in question 1, and kind of giving them the suggested next steps of what to do that they can do over the next year to help them progress. And what's great about that as well is obviously we use Target Connect for bulk emailing, appointments, and then also App Integral for some of the career tools. And when we send out those emails, we see a spike in then the activity of our career management tool. So it really shows the impact of, that extra tailored kind of communication, getting it out, getting something specific to those, and I suppose responding to that career readiness, which has been really, really effective. And another thing we've been trying to do is, I suppose, socialize the language of the survey. So in our postering, you saw some of these statements there. I don't know where I am, or I know where I want to go, but I don't know how to get there. Using something like that. So it's actually socializing. So when the students are filling it in every year, it's starting to become familiar language that they're reading and I've seen around campus. And then another one is, looking way beyond out from Careers Network. Who else could find use in this data? Now, Dr. David Foster, Director of Careers Network in UCD, has been incredibly successful in actually getting it into the University Management Team Education Group, where the results are now going into programme development plans, and really informing where the career development initiatives are needed. Myself and Kevin have done a good bit of work with the Access Lifelong Learning team, and Kevin was actually able to develop them with using the same career registration data set, but actually put a lens for the access route. So they now have the power to actually explore this data set according to those data sets to see the differences, the opportunities for them, which is incredibly powerful. It's also a useful data set when you have the gender in there. I was presenting at an Athena Swan conference last week, and there is a section in the Athena Swan application around career development and the support provided by students. So this can become a really useful data set for anyone, particularly going from bronze to silver and being able to evidence the impacts that you're having on the career readiness. Or even the quality office, anyone undergoing their review, having a look at, again, impact evidence, another data set to be able to show how you're working with the students and getting them as recruitment ready as possible for when they finish. So that's for UCD. What about yourself, Emer?
So I suppose one of our things that we've done, and I have to thank my colleagues, I have 2 colleagues, Heather Burton and Dr. Duncan Berryman, who helped me with this in careers, although I should say they do that around many other surveys and things, so it's not that they're purely dedicated to career registration, but they've helped me over the last year in looking at our graduate outcomes survey and seeing, is there any correlation between what a student is telling us in career registration and where they eventually end up. Now, there's a slight difference between graduate outcomes in UK institutions in that the survey takes place at 15 months after graduation rather than 6 months, the way it would be in most AHECS institutions. But interestingly, even with that further piece out, we did find that there is relationships there between what students were telling us in their final year and where they ended up in terms of their graduate outcomes. So those that were sorted or, had a plan in place, where Marita showed those that were at those higher levels, they were at much lower risk of failing to have a graduate job or further or a higher level further study. So they were the group that was most likely to have they reach the higher level SOC graduate jobs and university further study courses. And those who were in final year, who had no plan, were unengaged, or were just starting to engage, sort of starting to put some plan in, they were the group that were below the university average in terms of positive outcomes for graduate outcomes. So I think Nicola talked about it, Marita talked about it, a few of us talked about it there, that one of the values of career registration is it helps you identify students that are at risk. And so we have been able to confirm that correlation. And so now the next thing for us is be, right, okay, so part of our strategy could then be that really at level 2, at pre-penultimate year, the more students we can get away from this unengaged, some plan area and up to the higher levels, then the more likely we are to achieve higher impact on the graduate outcome. So it's one of the factors that could help to improve potentially our graduate outcome statistics. So we do use it as a lead indicator. Other things that we're doing, the Power BI, those data visualizations that Kevin showed you, it's for people who are, look at spreadsheets and see a load of figures and think, oh my goodness, like that looks like finding needles in haystacks to me. Definitely the data visualizations are a game changer. Now, we have done some of those locally, haven't got us quite as extensive as Kevin has got to in UCD, because we've also been putting our graduate outcomes and our national student survey statistics into Power BI, but that is one of the things in on our list as well as to where we want to go next. And the other place that we want to go to next is through the working group and the AHECS group. I have to say we've really enjoyed a very productive relationship with UCD in terms of working together in the community of practice and outside the community of practice, and having other institutions. Jacqueline and a few of you have put up there that you might be interested in doing this in future, and Aisling so on joining us. So that piece, even within the community of data practice, the contacts that brings and the opportunity for you to broaden your network and get more ideas. I think it's an area that's growth in AHECS, and there's interest in it. And also through ourselves, we have the connection, because the UK universities have been doing this longer, and the group, the AHECS group, there is a group that's specifically dedicated to career registration, and I meet with them usually about once a month. But also we'll have UCD are joining us at that in the next month or so, because again, there's a lot of further work going on there, and that we're just working together on. So we've all got this career registration survey. Is there a chance that we could do a comparison ourselves in terms of how does Queen's information compare with Glasgow, compare with UCD, compare with all those sorts of things? But that's not going to be a quick one. That's going to be a matter of years pulling that one together. So those are the sort of things that we're thinking of. Very excited to find the link to graduate outcomes, because that means this has all the values that we've set out, but we can also confirm it's also now a lead indicator for graduate outcomes. So are any other
sorry, because I got this slide in after. Did you want to see what people were saying in relation to the question that you posed?
So we have had four institutions here saying that if they had the resource, they would consider running it, and that is the thing. And I think if you're a manager of a service or something listening in, that is one of the things. This is definitely not a thing maybe to give to somebody as an another task in their PDR. It takes planning and resource and thought in around it. So so hopefully today as well, we've given you an idea of the sort of things to take into account of that. But there's interest there, and anybody who's interested, absolutely, we're very keen to collaborate. There's 5 we have now saying they're interested. So any other questions you have? We mentioned the toolkit there. The toolkit, Caroline and Marita, that's being made available, isn't it? That's been shared in the AHECS community.
It is. It's up on their website. Caroline's put it up first under best practice guides. You'll get a full copy of it there. And obviously, you know, contact myself and Emer. I've put them both there, our email addresses. Please don't hesitate to contact us any time. If you're interested in joining our community practice, we're always welcome members, new members, because the more looking at this space, the better. But if anyone has any questions, maybe do you want to put up your hand, and we will take any questions that might be there.
All questions are good. There's no daft questions. Okay, thank you, Angela. Yeah, there's just a couple of things in the chat. So, no questions. Everybody's sort of content that they've got an overview. Hopefully, our aims today were really to give you an overview of the value of the survey, and also let you see what we were doing with it and where the toolkit was. Mark, or Catherine, were you thinking of asking a question?
More a comment, I suppose, and thanks so much to each of you for providing such a thorough overview. It's excellent to see that the community of practice, the amount of work being carried out within that, within your own institutions as well. I suppose as a head of service, it's really about that buy-in as well at that senior management level, I suppose, and I think becoming more familiar with the toolkit itself and just hearing, I suppose, the Maynooth experience of you know, getting there. I think will be interesting to see how that develops. But I suppose in terms of that, I suppose that's a question I have in relation to the practicalities of where this sits in terms of registration at the admissions level and then your own service. I suppose that is a really important part of being able to get the buy-in, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you need that senior management support. And actually, there's a question Conor Nugent has put in. This is maybe an example of one of the reasons why Conor's at in terms of rolling out how early do you survey the students. So, for instance, at Queen's, we are fortunate in that we have only the 2 questions that we ask the career thinking and employability activity in the last 12 months, but we have that embedded in our registration process. So when students are registering and enrolling for Queen's overall for the course at the start of the year, it's embedded in there. Yeah. But we would never have got that without, well, our head of service, Trevor Johnson, would have brought that to senior managers, put papers through a rationale for that, and liaised with the head, again, going back to what UCD was saying, with the head of the student information systems to get that through and in place and get it on their roadmap. And also, of course, then there is the resource and the things to go around it. You know, if you're getting a Power BI license, that's fine. But somebody's got to be able to use and interpret and analyse this data. So, you know, I needed the time from Heather and Duncan, or this would never have happened in and around other things. And so it's a matter of, as well, you know, getting the people with the right skills and the right resource to help you. But even at that, you know, if I had a dream list, I would be asking as well for a data analyst specialist as well to take it further. So, you know, this has got us this far, and it's a good long way in terms of what we got, but absolutely, and it is that piece. But the we have just presented, well, it's going to our senior managers, going to our pro vice chancellor, deans of education, etc. on Monday. Our graduate outcomes report is going, and in that we have explained how careers registration is a lead indicator to that. Let them see that, raise the profile of it, and also the career service as a whole at Queen's, just as UCD has done. We have created a future ready roadmap, which is based around students' career readiness and career thinking. And again, the career registration maps onto that, so that we can, again, we're targeting particular types of support at students according to their readiness to receive that type of information or participate in that type of event. And also we do the e-newsletters and the targeting of that to students as well. And again, that's dependent on the system. I know many of you have Career Connect. In our case, it's Simplicity My Future, and that allows us to, we upload, flag the career registration data, and we're able to do that for every student at Queen's and send them newsletters. So all of that takes resource, takes time, takes buy-in, And we spend a lot, one thing which is I find you spend a lot of time raising awareness of career registration, and when you explain it, you're also often re-explaining it to remind people of the value of this in the service, as well as then trying to raise it as well to schools, to senior managers. So yeah, a lot of time with that.
Yeah, a lot of joined up thinking, but I think
a lot of joined up thinking.
Really, really useful has been, I suppose, explicitly being able to see that in action and know that it's like, you know, you're only with what you're doing, which is so far along, it's still there's still so much more to do with it as well. So it very much is a process in accordance with linking in your employability, I suppose, agenda within your institute and where you work. But thanks very much for that. And I think there'll be more questions probably when I get involved in it a little bit more, but very interested in the work and thank you for sharing.
No problem, Catherine.
Thanks,
Thank
Catherine.
you. Anybody else have a question they want to ask before we go? There's been quite a few in the chat saying thank you and thank you for the overview. And we took Connor's question there as well. So guys, I think that's us, and I think this is the last AHECS Lunch and Learn of 2023. Is that right, Caroline?
That's right. Yeah, you went out in a good one.
We did indeed. So so listen, happy Christmas to everybody, and wish you all the best for 2023. And thanks to everybody for joining, and particularly these inputs, I think, from Kevin and Aisling and Nicola. We all really appreciate it, because I guess Marita, myself and Kevin have spent a lot of time around this, so their inputs was particularly valued. Thank you all for questions, etc. today. And to say the toolkit is there available, or join the community of practice if you want to find out a bit more.
Thank you for your time today and for a brilliant presentation.
Okay, thanks all.
Thanks, Caroline.
Happy Christmas.
Take care. Happy Christmas.